Hello! Welcome back to another Bible Story Children's Time. It's Monday, it's Labor Day here in the U.S., which means it's a holiday, and a lot of you are taking some time off. Interestingly enough, I was doing some reading, and like 40% of the businesses in the U.S. Are still operating in some way. 40% of the stores, and essential services and things like that are working. So not everybody gets to take the day off, but a lot of us do. And it's great to have that holiday time when you can kick back and relax a little bit. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's Bible Story Children's Time. Because today's Old Testament Monday, and we're going to be going back to Genesis. And you might be wondering, okay, what does Genesis have to do with kicking back and relaxing? Or you may have figured it out already. But let me set it up for you. If you remember last week, we talked about the story of creation as it was told in Genesis. And we talked about how God, the Spirit of God, as Genesis tells us, moved through the chaos, and it called the chaos into order. And then, we created and separated light from dark, and separated the waters, which represented chaos, from the land, which represented stability. And all of these different things that God did in creating the universe. And we can read it either very literally, or we can read it from a more theological standpoint that many of the readers would have had, and probably the writers would have had as well, that the whole story was about God creating chaos, or creating order out of chaos, and creating purpose out of purposelessness. And remember, we mentioned that in ancient philosophy, for something to exist meant it had to have a purpose. So we have got all that in mind, and then we get to the beginning of chapter 2, Genesis chapter 2, and it begins this way. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Okay. That's what we're looking at today. And there's two really interesting ways to look at that. The first is that in Near Eastern, or what we would think of maybe as Middle Eastern theology or religion at that time, they thought of the temples as being resting places of God, whatever God you happen to worship. So we have, in the beginning chapter of Genesis, we have God creating a temple. The universe is God's temple. The universe is God's residence. And then once it is completed, God rests within it. And this fits in really nicely with the philosophy of the day back then, umpteen thousand years ago when this was written, more than 3,000 years ago when this was written. Because that's what gods did. Now, typically, human beings would build a temple, and then whatever god the temple was for would come to the temple and reside within it and rest within it. But in this case, since the temple was something much bigger, it was created by God, and then God himself rested within it. And to the readers thousands of years ago, and remember, readers are part of the triangle of understanding, they would have looked at that and said, oh, that makes perfect sense. The universe is God's temple, the heaven and the earth and everything. God built the temple, and now God rests on it, or within it. And for many years, that was just fine. Now, we look at it today with a little different view of theology, a little bit different view of who God is, and it gives us pause. Because we think of God as being omnipotent, meaning God is all-powerful. Is that the way you think of God? That's the way we learn about God. That God, since God obviously created the universe and everything in it, God is God. He could do anything. So if God, then the line of reasoning goes this way. If God is omnipotent, if God is all-powerful, then why does God have to rest? Admittedly, we're thinking of it in anthropomorphic terms. We're thinking of it as though God were a human being, or some type of being at least. But it raises a good question. Why should God have to rest? If God does have to rest, does that mean that you could get to a point where God would be doing so much work, creating so many universes or whatever it is that makes God tired, that God would just be too tired to go on? And the answer to that, as far as we know, is no. That's not how it works. Then what does this mean, God rested? Well, you look at the Hebrew word that we interpret as rest, and rest is one legitimate interpretation of it. That word is Shabbath, which eventually found its way in English to being Sabbath. So if God had Sabbath then, Shabbath, on the seventh day, that means rest. It also means to cease or desist from what you were doing. So then, what we learn is maybe God wasn't resting per se, like, oh, I have to recharge, but, okay, I have done what I need to do, so I'm no longer creating. I'm done with this job. It's Miller time. And that makes sense. And it's a lot easier to understand. It's also possible God was modeling for humanity, because later on God would tell us that we need to take time as well. That we need to take time for rest and reflection. Like Labor Day. One of the other ways of looking at it, and it's related, is that once God created an orderly universe, once God created the different physical laws that we have, all of this, the innermost guts and mechanics of how the universe works, God could let it coast. God could, at that point, sit back and say, you know what? I have done everything I need to do to make sure that this universe that I have created continues to function by itself. So I can wash my hands of it. And then, interestingly enough, with what comes after this, we can think that maybe then God can turn his attention to one of God's creations, humanity. Because the rest of chapter 2 in Genesis, first it recapitulates creation. It tells a little bit of a different version, and that has to do with probably another person writing it, and they just slapped that puppy in there. But then it talks about humanity, Adam and Eve, and God's relationship with them. So that makes sense. God creates the universe. God gets the universe running the way God wants it and says, all right, now I'm going to chill for a little bit, see what's on Netflix, and then I am going to focus my love and attention on human beings. And God's been doing that ever since. So that is a reminder to us of several things. One is the amazing work that God has done in creating this universe. The second is that God recognized that there was a time and place in life, if we can talk about God and life together, maybe existence, that there is a time and place that you sit back and say, okay, I have done what I can here. Now I'm going to relax, and then I'm going to look at something else. And that's important for us as human beings to remember. You know, you look back at Labor Day, it's created to remember and to commemorate the work of the unions who won so many freedoms for us today as workers. You know, they through the work of unions, they created or caused the creation of 5-6 day work weeks instead of 8-day or 7-day work weeks. Sometimes it seems like 8. 7-day work weeks. They, you know, through their work, they got companies to start looking at things like vacation, just basically treating their employees like human beings. And that's a good thing. So today, Labor Day, is a good day for those of us who can to engage in some rest and some reflection, along with all the other fun activities we have, you know, the picnics and the whatever else you've got going on. That's great. But also remember that we got to this point because of things that other people have done. We got to this point in our work lives because of things that unions and other labor activists have done over the centuries. And also we got to this place just in general, based on the hard work, the loving work, and the care of God. So we should be thankful. And we should honor all that God has done by reflecting on that at some point today before we get back to our work lives tomorrow. So, enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great Labor Day. Stay safe. And we'll see you here tomorrow, 5 o'clock, for New Testament Tuesday. Take care.